History will record not only how we mostly ignored the people of Syria in their hour of need, but worse, how we looked our own blindingly obvious national interests in the demise of the Assad regime. Virtually every single interest that we have in the Middle East, whether it's aiding Israel's search for peace and security, protecting Lebanon's sovereignty, preventing Iranian hegemony, undercutting Hezbollah and Hamas, nurturing Iraq's development, sustaining our partnership with Turkey, or just promoting democracy and human rights, is dramatically, even exponentially furthered by the Syrian people getting rid of the Assad regime. And to be very clear, I am not calling for U.S. military intervention in Syria. It's both unwise and unnecessary. But there is considerably more that we can and must do. First, and above all, the President must call for Bashar al-Assad, that blood-soaked dictator, to step down, trifling with the lives of the people of Syria with nuanced, lawyerly phrases like, quote, President Assad must understand he is not indispensable, unquote, is shameful. Noting that Assad has lost legitimacy without calling for his immediate departure from power trivializes the deaths of thousands of Syrians killed by Assad's thugs. And most importantly, between the Syrian Accountability Act and the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, the President has at his disposal massive economic and political powers of coercion and punishment. The Obama administration has barely scratched even the surface of their utility in aiding the people of Syria and throwing off this regime of murderers and thieves and torturers of children. All bilateral trade with Syria should end immediately. All Syrian banks should be barred from the U.S. financial system immediately. All Syrian regime assets in the United States should be frozen immediately. All official Syrian travel to the United States should cease immediately. We must act. I look forward with no joy to hearing from our witnesses' efforts to defend the indefensible and to explain the inexplicable.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. Any other members who would like to make opening statements will have 1 minute. And I believe the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins, was here next. Mr. Higgins, you're recognized for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing today. A fundamental principle of democracy is the right of self-determination and freedom of expression. For the people of both Syria and Iran, this right has been denied. They have been denied freedom of speech and freedom of expression by oppressive regimes clinging to power however they can. This is an important time in our nation's history. This is not only a regional conflict, it's one of global consequence as well. The whole world is watching civilian populations as well as authoritarian regimes to see what the response of the United States will be. We have a moral obligation to continue efforts to undermine Assad, to encourage his departure as quickly as possible, and I look forward to the expert testimony of our panel here today. Thank you.
Thank you, and the gentleman yields back, and the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Murphy, is recognized for a minute.
I look forward to the gentleman's testimony. I'll waive my opening statement.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward very much to the testimony. I must say I respect you a lot, Mr. Chairman, but I don't necessarily subscribe to your critique of the administration with respect to policy in Iran. I actually think we've been yielding some results in coordinating with allies and in enforcing the sanctions in a way that heretofore were not. With respect to my colleagues and my friends' critique of the Syria policy, it's powerful and needs to be heeded, but a word of caution. This is not a unidimensional situation. It's a multidimensional situation, and we have to not only worry about regime change, we have to worry about what takes its place. And so that's a challenge for American diplomacy, and I think we need to respect that while at the same time expressing our frustration with pace and tone and the words being used that my colleague rightfully criticizes. With that, I yield back.
Okay. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing today. I've long been concerned about the egregious human rights abuses taking place daily in Iran. Several months ago, I introduced bipartisan legislation to require mandatory investigations and impose sanctions on those who aided in the brutal crackdown following the June 2009 election. The regime has made it clear that it will not hesitate to use violence and intimidation to suppress any threats to its iron-fisted rule. The number of executions in Iran has been steadily rising, with 39 just in the month of March. The United States must show that we are serious in our commitment to fighting human rights abuses and to giving opposition the necessary tools to speak out and stand up to this brutal regime. I look forward to the witnesses' testimony on U.S. policy and the efforts being made to document and publicize cases of abuse in Iran and providing platforms for the opposition moving forward. I thank the Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, is recognized. Did he walk out? Okay. And then last but not least, I would ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, who is a member of the full committee but not this committee, be entitled to all the privileges of the members of this committee, except that he go last. The gentleman is recognized for the purpose of making an opening statement for 1 minute.
Happy to go last. Glad to see Assistant Secretary Posner, who's doing an outstanding job at DRL, and I thank the Chairman for holding these hearings. I hope the Assistant Secretary would go back and talk to others at the State Department who are planning to issue a license to General Electric to repair the supposedly civilian aircraft of the Iranian airlines. These aircraft have been used and will be used to ferry weapons to Iran and then ferry them on to Syria, where Iranian weapons deliveries have already resulted in the deaths of hundreds of brave Syrian people. And I want to talk about the humanitarian crisis faced in Camp Ashraf. I want to commend to the Assistant Secretary's reading and to my colleagues for possible co-sponsorship House Resolution 231. It was introduced by the chairwoman of the full committee and myself, and it urges that the United States do everything possible to ensure the physical security and protection of Camp Ashraf residents, noting that as recently as April 8th, Iraqi forces initiated force against the residents of that camp, and apparently some 34 people died, 300 were wounded. And I would also point out that the Iraqi ambassador, in trying to disclaim any responsibility for this, points that the MEK happens to be listed on the terrorist list. We need to protect the people of Camp Ashraf. I yield back, and I thank the Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you very much. And the Chair would like to note the presence of quite a number of people here relative to the Camp Ashraf issue, and I would just commend those people and their associates for their dedication and relentless commitment to their cause, and it has certainly been noted by many members of the Foreign Affairs Committee over the past weeks and months, and so we would just like to note that for the record, that they have been in attendance time after time after time, and it is duly noted for the record. At this time, I would like to recognize the two members of the panel who will be testifying this afternoon and introduce them. We first have Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman.